Minister, it's a real pleasure to have you join us today. Thank you for taking time out from your busy schedule. I know firsthand what it's like the day after the cabinet's named, and even though you've returned to the same portfolio, there's no shortage of government business and issues that are coming into your inbox. Your work started even before the cabinet was named. And I want to acknowledge the excellent news last week that the government is extending supports for the hardest hit sectors to get them through the coming months. We've also seen good progress on a safe reopening of the border, which has provided some hope for our beleaguered travel and hospitality sectors. However, looking ahead, our members consistently tell us about two things they want to see. We need to finish the fight on COVID-19, and the other is the need to execute measures that will generate sustainable economic growth. Minister, thank you for being with us. And to start the conversation, let me turn it over to you for any opening thoughts you may have.
Okay, thank you very much, Perrin, and thank you to all of your members for the chance to talk to you today. And I do want to thank you, Perrin, and I want your members to hear this, for the ability that I have to just call you up anytime and to get your advice on some of the tough decisions we face. And, you know, Perrin, I know you and I will not always agree on everything, and I'll say that to your members too. But it's really important for me personally to have direct input from all the people who drive the Canadian economy, really with very much including business. And I want to say to your members, you know, I know that I can have very confidential conversations with Perrin, let him know what the challenges are I'm facing, and hear what impact different directions of policy would have on all of you guys. So thanks for that, Perrin, and you know, thanks all of you for the feedback you provide that really makes it possible for me to have a sounding board. So that's point one. Point two, you know, inevitably, and particularly at a time like today, when we are just coming out of this tremendous national and global trauma, the natural thing is to focus on the problems and the work still to be done. And of course, that's right, because there's a lot of work still to do. But I want to start off on a really optimistic note. And I just want to say to all of us that I think as Canadians, we can look at how we have handled COVID, both the health and economic hits we've taken from it. I think we can look back and say, we've done really a pretty good job. You know, if you look at what has to be the measure that we care about the most, which is health and lives of Canadians, Canada in the G7 has a record only second to Japan. And if you look at the Canadian economy, I want to say to everyone here, I know that for so many businesses, this has been really, really rough, and people have endured through resilience and incredible ingenuity and hard work. But you really have endured. And the September jobs numbers for me showed something really remarkable, which is that we have recovered all the jobs lost through COVID. And then in terms of where we are in finishing the fight against COVID, to which you alluded, Perrin, you know, again, I think we cannot be complacent. We need to continue to be careful. And I would even say, you know, a peace, order, and good government, cautious, prudent approach is going to serve us well in the coming months. But we're doing a pretty good job today at getting on top of the fourth wave. And that is serving us tremendously well. And every single person who's on this call is contributing to that. So I really just want to begin with reminding us to be, again, without any complacency and with appropriate humility, to say, you know what, we as a country have done a pretty good job, and our recovery is going well. And I'm now happy to answer your questions, Perrin.
Well, thanks very much, Minister, for those introductory remarks. let's get started. Can we start perhaps with your priorities? We have had an election. There's a new parliament. We have a new cabinet named as of yesterday. How have your priorities changed over the course of the last several weeks?
How have they changed over the past several weeks? Well, look, I would say my priorities were really solidified during the election campaign. I campaigned literally from coast to coast personally, and I knocked on doors with a lot of our candidates across the country. And you know yourself, Perrin, from your own life experience, nothing beats actually talking to Canadians, asking them to vote for you, and hearing from them what their priorities are. Nothing beats that when it comes to really understanding what does the country need. So what are my priorities? What are our government's priorities? Number one, jobs and growth and a full, vigorous recovery from the COVID recession. And, I've pointed out the strength of the jobs recovery, and, we should all take heart from that. But everyone on this call knows the recovery is uneven. It's uneven in the world. I think we're discovering turning off the world economy was easier than turning it back on. There are hiccups. And so our government really believes we have to watch that like a hawk or like a group of hawks, a flock of hawks perhaps, and really be there to support that full recovery. So jobs and growth, number one. You know that getting the job done on early learning and childcare is a personal priority of mine. And we went into the election with 8 provinces and territories. I'm focused on getting the rest done. And what really heartened me on the campaign trail was hearing, of course, the parents are keen on this, but hearing from a lot of business people saying, I need to have a strong labor force. That is my priority. I heard that from a lot of people. Well, early learning and childcare, that is going to be one of the drivers for every single business person on this call. Once we have that system in place, you guys are going to have a lot more people who are trained, well-educated, keen to work. So for me, I see early learning and childcare as a real economic driver. Green transition, certainly really, really important. And last month I was at the World Bank IMF meetings in Washington, and I was very struck by the extent to which the global economy is committed to that transition. It is happening. I know, as we heard from the Port of Vancouver, Canada is fundamentally a trading nation. And that means we have to be sure that the stuff we make and sell to the world is stuff the world wants. And that means we really do now have to get down to the nuts and bolts of the green transition. Because if we don't accomplish that here, the world will just say, well, Canada, we don't want the stuff you make. And I know that none of us want that. So I would say green transition. And then maybe finally, in the budget in April, we had a number of, very focused business growth targeted measures, like the 1.5 million of eligible investments that businesses could immediately expense, like the digital adoption program for small business. And I am keen on getting those up and running. So all of you, as the economy reopens and as we put COVID behind us, all of you can take advantage of them.
Mr. Thank you. The economic environment in which you're having to do your planning at this point continues to evolve very rapidly. Today, the Bank of Canada issued projections for Canada's economic performance this year and next year. And compared with their previous expectations, they downgraded their expectations for growth, and they virtually doubled what they expect for inflation this year. Can we get your sense of what your expectations are for the Canadian economy? Are we looking at a temporary blip, or is there a more serious issue that the government needs to address?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Perrin. And I had a good conversation late yesterday with the governor of the Bank of Canada, as always happens on the eve of such announcements. And we spent quite a bit of time together at the IMF World Bank meetings. And those were good opportunities to share views. Let me say the following. I think what we need to be very mindful of in Canada is the unevenness of the recovery from the COVID recession is truly a global phenomenon. And I would say it is particularly an industrialized economies of the world phenomenon. And this came through very, very strongly in the G7 and G20 meetings. Everyone is experiencing some version of the same thing. And very broadly, it is that turning everything off, very traumatic, but that was one switch that we just flipped. And turning it back on again, we are discovering, and I don't think we should be surprised by that, is a little more complicated. And we are seeing second and third order consequences that were impossible, I think, to anticipate because the world had never done this before. Chief among them, I would say, some of the supply chain issues that a lot of the world economy is experiencing, and certainly many Canadian businesses are experiencing. So I think we need to understand the situation from that perspective. I will also, you mentioned inflation, and I would say there, Perrin, that I think it's very important for all of us to be mindful of how central affordability is in the lives of regular Canadians, in the lives of the kind of people whose doors I was knocking on across the country during the campaign. And at the end of the day, people have a really simple and I think very appropriate measure on whether their government is doing its job, on whether their employers are doing their job. And that measure is, if I am prepared to work hard, and indeed, hopefully, if I'm prepared to work hard, is there a job out there for me? That's why I took such comfort from the jobs numbers. And if there is a job and I take that job and I'm prepared to work hard, can I have a decent life for myself and my family? That is absolutely key. And that is why the affordability question, particularly now as we're seeing some strains in the recovery from the COVID recession, is so top of mind for me. And it's why, again, I would say I see early learning and childcare as really addressing affordability for parents of young children. It's a reason that housing is an issue that was so important during the election campaign. I heard from a lot of people about, and is I would say, preoccupation of mine. We need to work hard to be sure that hardworking middle-class Canadians, if they want to buy a home, can buy a home, and whether they want to buy a home or prefer to rent, that they can afford a safe, decent place to live. And that's important to me as a democratically elected politician. But I'm going to humbly submit, Perrin, I am certain, actually, that it is equally important to you and to your members, because you need the people who work in your businesses to be able to afford a decent place to live. And you need your customers to be able to afford a decent place to live so that they can buy some of the goods and services you produce. So that's where I would say our focus is in addressing those very real challenges.
Minister, as we look past the pandemic toward the recovery, there's a lively debate about what the role of the private sector should be relative to the role of the government. During the unprecedented crisis that was caused by the pandemic, the government had no choice but to intervene massively in the economy and our lives. And some argue that now that the government has moved into the bedroom upstairs, it should take over the whole house. For our part, we believe the focus has to be on empowering the private sector if we're going to be able to pay for the debt that we've been forced to acquire and for new programs. What's your perspective on this debate? What is the role, in your view, of the private sector as we look to recovery and beyond?
Perrin, I am probably one of the few people on this Zoom call who has actual personal experience economy. When I was a student, I lived for a year in the Soviet Union, and then a little bit after that, I lived in the Soviet Union for a few months before it collapsed in the summer of 1991. And that experience had a profound impact on me because it gave me a visceral appreciation for how important it is to have a vigorous private sector. And look, it's important for reasons of human rights and human freedoms, but it's also important because I really like being able to walk to the drugstore around the corner from my house and buy toothpaste without asking someone to get it for me from the West. I like being able to buy a roll of toilet paper. I like being able to go to the grocery store and know that I can buy sausages without standing in line, or getting the scuttlebutt among students of, oh wow, they have sausages at the butcher's today. So I am 100% of the view that the principal driver of jobs and growth is and an employer of Canadians is the private sector. I absolutely agree with that contention. Where I would say the government comes in is it's our job to create the infrastructure, both social and physical, that business and the people who work in business need to thrive. That means, yes, early learning and childcare. That means, yes, affordable housing. That means the trade infrastructure that the Port of Vancouver absolutely needs. That means transit infrastructure in cities that people need to get to their jobs and to get to the businesses represented here. So that's where that's how I see it. And I think that actually is how the majority of Canadians see things. And the only thing I would add is I really believe none of us can understate the magnitude of the transition that the world's global economy is beginning now when it comes to moving from using fossil fuel energy to renewable energy. I think that is a shift comparable only to the Industrial Revolution itself. It's going to take so much hard work from all of us. If we do it right, I think that transition can be a real driver of jobs and growth in Canada. If we do it wrong, we could get left behind. And I do think the government, in addition to our core measure of introducing a price on pollution, which is a profoundly market mechanism for driving that change, I think the government also can and needs to be there to provide some support, some shaping of that transition. And I can certainly tell you that I know the governments of other Western industrialized economies are very much intending to do that.
Minister, can we talk for a minute about the pandemic supports and the announcement that you made last week? And I want to be clear at the outset that we're exceptionally grateful to you for the support you've provided over the pandemic, which is our main streets in Canada would have looked profoundly different without it. And the fact that you announced an extension of supports was a very positive element last week. And we also agree with you that these supports should be targeted to people who most need it. You are hoping, as we all are, that we will emerge from the recession and from the pandemic, we'll be able to see growth in a more open economy. But if we're wrong, if there's a fifth wave, are you prepared to revisit the scope and end dates for these supports?
So look, my first answer to you, Perrin, is the line that is often attributed to Keynes, but I think is probably most correctly attributed to the economist Paul Samuelson, which is when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do? And I do think that all of us need to be incredibly humble, probably, in general, that is a good characteristic to try to develop and evince, but particularly humble when it comes both to the health trajectory of the coronavirus and also to the economic consequences of fighting it. No one has a perfect record in predicting how those two things will go. And in fact, what most of the predictions have in common is they've all been wrong. So let's all be humble, and let's also be clear that our government said at the beginning, we'll do whatever it takes for as long as it takes. And that was the right thing. I really am so confident. I'm not going to say that every single thing we did in terms of fighting the coronavirus was perfect. That would be, simply wrong, and it's not what I believe. Of course, mistakes were made. But very broadly, we did the right thing, and it has worked. The Canadian economy is in remarkably good shape given the trauma that it has endured. And broadly speaking, we have prevented economic scarring. And that is great. And it is partly because of government support. And again, I want to say it is also, and I would say chiefly, due to the hard work, the endurance, and the resilience of Canadians. So having said all that, it was right to put our supports in place, humble about where things will go, and open to unpredictable developments. I will also point out two things that I know you know because we've talked about them. Our plan, which takes us through to May, so giving businesses a lot of predictability, which is something I was hearing from people that people wanted. So we've given you a path all the way to May. It includes an insurance policy. It includes a lockdown program that would snap into action were local lockdowns to happen. So that's already there. If we were to find ourselves with a fifth wave, God forbid, Perrin, it frightens me to even say those words. But if we were to find ourselves with a fifth wave, the program we put forward last week contains provisions that would allow the highest level of support. So people should take comfort from that we have accepted that there could be things no one is predicting right now that happen, and we want to put in place in legislation a policy that we could flip into action immediately, because if it were to happen, we'd want to be able to act fast. But the final thing I want to say is you've also asked me questions about inflation, about Canada's fiscal position, and about the economic recovery. And those are also good and important questions. And those questions are connected very much with our announcement last week. Because our announcement last week was also about keeping our promise to Canadians, where we said, yes, these extraordinary supports are going to be in place to fight COVID and the COVID recession, but these extraordinary measures, which do require extraordinary spending, are temporary. And I believe the reason that Canadians broadly supported this unprecedented action is they understood temporary crisis, temporary measures. But you have to keep your promise. And as the crisis comes to an end, you have to pivot to a different, more targeted, and let me not mince words here, less expensive level of support. And that is precisely what we have done. And, I really hope that your members, who I know from previous occasions, are people who think about the debt, who think about the deficit. I want to tell you guys, I do too. Please bear that in mind when you think about our announcement last week.
Thank you. Minister, there's much more to talk about, and we'll do that over the course of coming months. Sadly, our time has run out, but just before I ask our chair to thank you on our behalf, perhaps I could be allowed to express a personal word of thanks to you personally, both for your remarkable accessibility during the last year and a half, and also for the critical support that you've provided to Canadian business. So it has been a remarkable relationship. You have reached out frequently, and despite the schedule that you've been maintaining, you have always been available. That's tremendously appreciated. I'm personally very grateful for that. I'm looking forward to working with you in the days ahead. Now let me hand it over to Mario to express our appreciation to you a bit more formally for joining us today.